Part 71. A Sledgehammer Breaks into Pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 701. After getting first-hand information from Jun, Kuzin asked again, what about the G-4 at Polusalino? Who is responsible? This kind of inquiry can also be seen. How good is this guy Kuzin? As a general of the headquarters, after leaving the headquarters for a period of time, he is not very sensitive to the news of the headquarters. Jun rolled his eyes at Kuzin, and then said, over at Porosalino, Stolobelli should be in charge of G-4. Stolobel, Kuzin nodded. Stolobelli is Porosalino's confidant and the neutral navy. Now it seems that Sakaski may have only taken one G-3 and did not exert too much force. But thinking about it, it is impossible for the Warring States Marshal to hand over all the branch bases in the New World to Sakaski. Of course, the new naval bases built in the New World are not only G-3 and G-4. There are also other bases. However, the only ones built in the fortress mode and to protect the geographical advantages of the new Navy headquarters are G-3 and G-4. These two are more important, and what is needed is the Lieutenant General of the headquarters to be in charge. The rest are not so important, and it is impossible for the Lieutenant General of the headquarters to be in charge. On the contrary, these new naval bases are likely to be guarded by some of their defeated Lieutenant Generals after the martial battle is over. So Kuzin didn't ask about the other bases, he just asked about G-3 and G-4. Next, there is top secret information, Jun said softly at first, and then glanced at Smoker and Dashiki behind him. Smoker and Dashiki were stunned for a moment, and then they both nodded and prepared to evacuate the room and go out to guard the door. But just when they were about to make a move, Jun waved his hand again and said, no, just listen to it, be mentally prepared, and learn to control your mouth at the same time. As soon as he finished speaking, without waiting for Smoker and Dusky's reaction, Jun said in a deep voice, the new naval headquarters is defined as Marineford. Kuzin was stunned for a moment and asked, what do you mean, to move or not to move? I've been wondering before, G-3 is almost finished, why is there no one to supervise the construction of the new headquarters? At speaking of this, Kuzin paused for a moment, and there was a touch of surprise and disbelief in his eyes, as if he had thought of something. It seems you have already thought of it, Jun grinned and said. Marshal of the Warring States period means, move Marineford directly to the New World? Kuzin asked in a deep voice. Well, it's top secret at the moment, Jun nodded without hesitation and said. This is really, beyond imagination, the Marshal is so courageous. 11 Kuzin whispered softly. Leave this job to Yuxiao. Not many people know about it so far. Even Sakaski doesn't know about it. You are the first among the generals to know about it, Jun said with a smile. Kuzin glanced at Jun, and then said, it's useless if you know it, right? It would be good to do less useless work. Although I am not sure, I think Sakaski might have thought that the supervision of the construction of the new naval headquarters should be left to him. Maybe I still have some expectations in my heart, Jun smiled. After a slight pause, Jun spoke again. What Marshal Boss means is that after G-3 and G-4 are completely completed, the strength of the headquarters will be used to build G-3, the name of the 4 combat troops began to be filled in the New World. Once the headquarters moves to the New World, the elite force will be restored directly and the war against the pirates of the New World can be launched at any time. Kuzin nodded again, then smiled and said, I knew that the Marshal could not be partial. Sure enough, I knew about this first. Is it because of the mission? Of course, to be a Marshal, one must keep a balanced bowl of water. It is impossible to go too far. After I leave, I will tell Porosalino exactly what he said, Jun said with a smile in his eyes. Sure enough, Kuzin was not surprised at all. After the business was finished, Kuzin and Jun started chatting again. Smoker and Dashki were very surprised. The big guys in this department did something unexpected. Marineford moved directly to the New World? That's awesome. At the same time, Smoker and others can also feel the message that war is coming soon. The pace of our headquarters is moving very fast. It can be seen that the Marshal is seizing the initiative in the war. Just when Smoker and Daska were thinking about these, Jun lit a cigarette again and bit his mouth, then patted the sofa and said, "Okay, I'm just here to talk to you. By the way, let's take a look at the construction situation of G-3, anyway, you said it, so I went to see it. As a general of the headquarters, you can't lie to me about this kind of thing, right? I'll leave. Come in a hurry, go in a hurry." Kyuzin smiled, but he didn't do anything to persuade Jun to stay. "This inspector is very busy." Jun smiled and waved his hands. Standing up, Jun picked up the tea on the table and took a sip. Then he threw the justice cloak on his shoulders and headed towards the door with Smoker and Dashki. He walked out, obviously not intending to ask Kyuzin to give him a gift. Kyuzin also had no intention of giving a gift, but just when Jun put his slender fingers on the door handle, Kyuzin suddenly spoke. "Got it?" "Jun," Kyuzin called out. Jun's movements stopped, but his fingers were still on the door handle and he didn't look back. "Although I think I already know the answer, but give me an accurate answer, do you want to compete for the Marshal?" Kyuzin asked. A smile appeared on Jun's face, but he still didn't look back and said with a smile, "Isn't that natural? Otherwise, what would I do if I went back to my headquarters?" After listening to Jun's words, Kyuzin fell silent. Without waiting for anything else, Jun opened the door and prepared to go out. At this moment, Kyuzin spoke again. In this case, Kyuzin said something first, Jun stopped, and then Kyuzin continued, "It's interesting to think about you becoming the Marshal. I will fully support you." It was only then that Jun turned his head, glanced at Kyuzin, and said softly, "Thank you very much." Then, without waiting for Kyuzin's response, Jun walked out of the room very simply. The door disappeared from Kyuzin's sight. Smoker and Dashki also quickly followed out, and Dashki closed the door very considerately. These two guys were a little shocked. They followed the Jun Grand Inspector around casually and felt that their concepts were shattered. First of all, the Navy headquarters Marineford will be directly relocated to the New World. Secondly, now that he is still the favorite to compete for the position of Marshal, General Kyuzin actually chose to take a step back at this time and support his eldest sister, Dao to take the position. While feeling surprised, Smoker looked at the Jun boss who was walking in front without looking back, and was also filled with emotion. Although he has been away from the headquarters for a long time, he has not had any contact or understanding with this big boss before. However, I still know some rumors about her. In short, she is very unconventional. She used to be a dovish navy, but after going to G-5, this big boss seems to have taken off all the labels on him. Her identity is no longer a dove or hawk. Now that I think about it, this big boss is a person who is outside the various factions and clearly does not take sides, but he can become a strong contender for the position of Marshal. It's simply amazing. Even, Smoker suddenly thought of something again, and there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Even, maybe it just happens that someone like her, without a faction label, has an advantage in competing for the Marshal position this time, right? But there was a deeper level that Smoker couldn't imagine. But the Warring States Marshal knew it very well, and maybe Kyuzin also knew it very well, so he just made up his mind and said that, right? As the general in charge of the Navy, Warring States can naturally understand the problems that are arising in the Navy today. Kyuzin and Sakaski, doves and hawks are surrounding the position of Marshal, and a vigorous naval power struggle is about to begin. Struggle is a good thing, because only through struggle can we have motivation and activate the potential of the Navy. Previously, various factions naturally had their struggles, but they remained in a state of struggle without breaking up. Now, the Generalissimo of the Warring States period has discovered that something is wrong. If this situation continues, the Navy is likely to break the state of fighting without defeat and undergo drastic changes. This is something he really doesn't want to see, because as a marshal, he knows very well what will happen to the Navy after this happens. Factions are divided, there is internal instability, and there is even a lack of coordination. In short, it will seriously affect the combat effectiveness of the Navy. But there was nothing he could do about the Warring States Marshal. Sakaski wanted to be the Marshal, and Kuzan didn't want Sakaski to be the Marshal even to death. The leaders of the two factions are like this. Even if he is a Marshal, he cannot stop this struggle. Until Jun comes back to the world. Both Kuzan and Sakaski have strong labels. They are a Dove leader and a Hawk leader of 883 people. In the battle for the position of Marshal, there will definitely be a fight. As for Jun, this may not be the case. She had removed all the labels on her body a few years ago. Her relationship with Kuzan and Sakaski has not reached the point where they dislike each other when they meet. On the contrary, they seem to be pretty good. At the same time, his abilities and qualifications are sufficient, and his strength is strong enough. More importantly, if Jun seizes the position of Marshal, in the view of the Warring States period, it can effectively balance the struggle between the two major naval factions and continue the original state of fighting without defeat. This is the most important thing. Therefore, after Marshal Sengoku made Jun the chief inspector, his thoughts had changed somewhat. Before, he supported Kuzan, but now, he is ready to support Jun. And Kuzan seemed to have realized something after meeting Jun and hearing her say that she wanted to compete for the position of Marshal. After weighing it in his mind, he also understood that it was indeed more suitable for Jun to take the lead as the new Navy Marshal than Kuzan. At the same time, Kuzan naturally has deep feelings for the Navy. He had no choice before, so he could only break up with Sakaski. Now that he has options, he doesn't want the Navy to fall into infighting. So he gritted his teeth, stamped his feet, and begged me. I will not fight for this naval marshal. Anyway, as long as Sakaski is not elected, Kuzan doesn't care. In this way, for the sake of the Navy and himself, Kuzan decided to fully support Jun's rise to power. Sitting in the office, Kuzan was also deep in thought. After a long time, he suddenly smiled and said to himself, sure enough, you have grown up too much. Jun, you may be the most suitable person to be the marshal. Although he gave up the fight for the marshal, Kuzan felt that he did not feel disappointed at this time. On the contrary, he was in a happy mood, and at the same time it was as if some shackles had been removed. Kuzan had always been a little gloomy before, although he had already expected that if he really fought with Sakaski with all his strength to grab the position of marshal, there must be a big problem in the Navy, but he just can't find the direction and can only rush forward. Now, it seems that the direction has been figured out, and he no longer has to fight and fight. He can just continue to be his salted fish general with peace of mind. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 702. New World Evernight Sea Avalon. In the headquarters of the Warhammer pirates, Orgrim, Beckman, and Nightingale were sitting together drinking tea and chatting. Have all the things that need to be solved been solved? No big problem. Orgrim spoke steadily while holding tea. Beckman held a cup of coffee in his hand, took a sip, then nodded and said, well, everything that needs to be solved has been solved. There are constant small problems, but there are no big problems. I'll wait until everything calms down, maybe 2 months at the latest. 2 months, Orgrim reached out and touched his chin and murmured. How? Are you in a hurry? Beckman asked with a smile. It's not that I'm anxious, it's that I think the Navy is very anxious. We are not prepared for war now. Once the Navy is prepared, the initiative will fall into their hands. Look, now G-3 and the G-4 naval base is almost completed. I think the Navy will make big moves. Orgrim thought for a while and said. Didn't it mean that the Navy would build a new naval headquarters in the New World? Will the Navy start a war before this matter is settled? Beckman asked after thinking for a while. It's not impossible, in fact, G-3.G-4 the size of the two new naval bases is enough to support the Navy in starting a war. These two bases are built in a fortress mode and are not too far apart, Orgrim said. Despite his usual appearance of not having anything to do with himself, Orgrim actually knew very well what was going on in the sea. And some are anxious about the Navy. Although the Navy's relocation of its headquarters is absolutely reliable news and is very likely to be realized. But Orgrim is still not sure whether the Navy plans to move its headquarters before the war or after the war. And this uncertainty has brought several more uncertain information. That is, if the Navy is to be relocated before the war, will the Navy's plan to start the war be postponed until the new Navy headquarters is established? If not, doesn't it mean that war is likely to come after the two crucial naval fortresses G-3 and G-4 are established? All this made Orgrim confused, and he secretly admired Sengoku, a wise general, for his ability to casually release some information, such as relocating his headquarters, which made Orgrim and other pirates estimate the Navy's war intentions. Completely confused. Because you can't figure out the way of the Navy at all. So after thinking about it, Orgrim felt that he had been trapped. Why do you have to worry about the Navy's rhythm? Since you can't figure out the Navy's path, you might as well stop trying and compete with the Navy for time. So this discussion with Beckman is to determine how long it will take for the Warhammer pirates to be ready for war. The time given by Beckman is about 2 months, which can absorb all the dividends obtained from the previous war. The war machine of the Warhammer pirates was able to operate at full power at that time. In other words, after 2 months of digestion, it will take several months of planning. Roughly speaking, within half a year at most, a new war can be started and a fight with the Navy headquarters can begin. This made Orgrim feel a little more relieved. He felt that after the completion of the two newly built bases and fortresses of the Navy, it would take about half a year to replenish the troops and prepare for war, right? If the Navy headquarters really needs to be built, the time needed may be counted in years. By then, the initiative in the war will inevitably be seized by the Warhammer pirates. In this way, there is a first mover advantage. But when I thought about it again, I felt something was wrong. That guy from the Warring States period was not a fool. He couldn't have thought of this. Would he really arrange it this way? Just sit back and watch Orgrim seize the initiative? Probably not, but how to operate it in the Warring States period? Orgrim didn't know that even though Beckman had superb wisdom, he didn't understand it either. However, Orgrim is still very vigilant in his heart. The intelligence confidentiality level of the Navy headquarters has been activated to the highest level. Now there is an intelligence whirlpool. The intelligence that can be obtained is amazing. How many warships are in and out today? Just Marineford. The rest are all blind. What does it mean that Marineford's intelligence level is so high? It means that the Navy is likely to have a top-secret big move, but what this move is, Orgrim can't guess. Maybe it's the start of a war? Maybe there was some saucy maneuver in the Warring States period? Could it be that he planned to hand over the Marshal before the war started? Orgrim muttered, but then he thought it was impossible, so he shook his head helplessly. The matter of Marshal must be handed over after the fight is over. Now, no matter how fully prepared we are for handing over, the Navy will definitely have power disorder for a period of time. Doesn't this give him a chance with Orgrim? With Sengoku's IQ, this kind of problem should not make mistakes. What exactly is the Navy going to do? Do you have any novel ideas? Orgrim took a sip of tea and asked Beckman. Beckman shook his head, with some doubts between his eyebrows. The movements of the Navy are too vague. Everyone on the sea clearly knows their general direction, but no one can figure out the specific direction. That guy from the Warring States period was very skilled, and I didn't have any good ideas." Beckman shook his head and said. Orgrim could only nod helplessly. At this moment, sitting not far away, the light in his hand dropped, and Nightingale, who was studying Orgrim's war hammer, suddenly after a smile. Orgrim turned his head and glared at this guy, and said unhappily, "What are you doing? Don't break my war hammer, okay? I just think it's a little funny. You guys here can't understand the Navy's approach. You think that guy from the Warring States period is very powerful. But the Navy has figured out what you think. I think the Sengoku Grand Marshal of the Navy is also in a bad mood at this time, because he also doesn't understand the strategy of our Warhammer pirates," Nightingale said with a smile, still using his surgical fruit ability to torture Orgrim's warhammer. "He is very strange. In theory, his ability can cut as long as he is within the range. But no matter how he operated, Orgrim's doom hammer just couldn't cut it. But what he said makes sense. The Navy also knows that the Warhammer pirates and Orgrim are definitely trying to seize the initiative in the war. But looking over and over, I just can't figure out where their movements are. Even Sengoku's research on the Warhammer pirates' reports for a long time did not reveal whether they had war intentions. There seemed to be no movement at all. Orgrim drank tea and walked birds in Avalon every day, looking like he had nothing to do. Concerning Avalon's army, the independent pirate group, and various major cotters, there is no urgent action, let alone combat readiness. They are all wandering around on their own. It's as if the Warhammer pirates said they wanted to compete with their navy, but in fact, they didn't do anything the same. But can Warring States believe this? He would definitely not believe it. He did not regard Orgrim as a fool or idiot. On the contrary, as an old opponent who had been entangled with Orgrim for decades, he was very convinced of Orgrim's difficulty. Therefore, his current mentality is similar to that of Orgrim. They are sure that the opponent is going to cause trouble, but they are not sure how the opponent is going to cause trouble. Orgrim didn't know yet, but the old Yinbai from the Warring States period was planning to directly parachute Marineford into the New World and start a war. The Sengoku side also didn't know that Orgrim had arranged for Teach to harm the Whitebeard pirates, and had planned on Sakazuki and the Navy headquarters to start the war with the Whitebeard pirates as the vanguard. Both of them were confused. Because they both feel that the other party is not ready. Without continuing the topic, Orgrim complained about Nightingale again. "Don't really break the hammer for me, okay? Also, why did you come back from Melview? Things over there are all busy, and you still don't know," Nightingale asked a little strangely, but the movement of tossing the hammer of destruction in his hand also stopped. "What do you know?" Orgrim also asked in a somewhat strange tone. "Boss Shiji's artificial ancient weapon plan has been completed. Indigo's technology has been successful. Melview is now full of powerful monsters that are not inferior to the Neptune class," Nightingale smiled and said. Orgrim was stunned for a moment. If Nightingale hadn't mentioned this matter, he would have almost forgotten that Boss Shiji had such great ambitions. Then, Orgrim's face became a little solemn and he asked, "What does Boss Shiji mean?" Going to sea again. If Boss Shiji really wants to do this, Orgrim actually feels a little irritated. After all, Boss Shiji has been very kind to him, and the relationship between the two is also here. If he really wants to go out and cause trouble in this era, he will definitely not be able to avoid Orgrim. This will be very troublesome, and it is very likely that the two sides will have a fight. However, there are pros and cons. At this time, if Boss Shiji comes out, it can also strengthen Orgrim's bargaining chip to harm those in the Navy. Nightingale shook her head and said, "No, at least before I leave, Boss Shiji will haven't figured it out yet." When I went to say goodbye to him, I could see that he hesitated. Orgrim was slightly relieved after hearing this. "Just hesitate?" "I'm afraid that Boss Shiji didn't hesitate at all," which means that he is still ambitious and ambitious. After thinking about it, Orgrim smacked his lips and said, "This is no small matter. I'd better go to Melview myself." When Beckman heard this, he nodded and said, "Yes, you should go and see it yourself. It's best to resolve this matter perfectly, otherwise it will be really troublesome." Orgrim smiled and nodded, and then said with some emotion, "Speaking of which, I haven't been back to Melview for many years. I don't know what's going on there. Does it still look like a fairyland on Earth?" "Well, in terms of scenery, it's 100 times better than Avalon," Nightingale said with a smile. Orgrim didn't refute anything. Indeed, if you look at the scenery alone, Melview is probably the most charming secret place in the world. Avalon is indeed not that good. Dark. The relationship between Orgrim and Shiki is a bit complicated, so after establishing his own business, Orgrim rarely goes to Melview. Shiki is not stupid, he also knows how to come to Avalon. It was not suitable, so he rarely came to Avalon. However, because of Andrest's previous visit, Shiki came to Avalon sometimes, but Orgrim never returned to Melview. Now, thinking about it, I really miss that paradise-like island on Earth. There is the place where he set sail in the New World. To read the underlined version of the novel. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 703. Melview, this wonderland hanging high in the sky. At this time, in the empty port of Melview, a battleship flying the flag of the Warhammer Pirates was parked here. It's not the Black Narwhal. Orgrim actually rarely uses the world's largest battleship, especially for the Warhammer Pirates. It was more like a symbolic battleship. Unless a large-scale war started, it was rarely seen moving. It parked quietly at the port of Avalon, as if the ship was parked and Avalon was extremely safe. Of course, the cost of maintenance is still very high. It is a complete gold-swallowing behemoth, but fortunately Orgrim has enough money, so he is not afraid of this. Melview's port is large, but there are only a few ships moored there. There are not many people at the port. There is no mundane feeling like the outside world here, and it has a somewhat otherworldly atmosphere. However, from this, Orgrim also saw some loneliness. Once upon a time, this was also a famous island in the New World. In this wide port, there were also scenes of thousands of sailboats racing. Golden Lion Fleet, Pirate Admiral Shiji. These are all scenes that have appeared in Orgrim's memory and were magnificent. Now, they have all disappeared. Only a lion, which once roared proudly all over the world, is resting here. Although Orgrim has not been here for a long time, he is still very familiar with this place. From a glance, at least the architecture of 617 has not changed much. He walked slowly off the boat, followed by Monet, the little secretary. This time, he was out to do business. Speaking of which, despite the fact that there were many warblers and swallows around him, every time he went out to do errands, no one seemed to follow him. Queen Stussy is already a homebody, but Hancock once had great ambitions, and after entering the New World, he spent some time conquering it. But after Her Majesty the Queen asked her to move to Avalon, the pirate empress immediately calmed down and stopped going to sea very often. The first room next to Orgrim was unwilling to move, and the second room naturally wouldn't be too conspicuous. As for Robin, the third wife, Schrodinger's wife, her relationship with Orgrim is unclear, but she does rarely leave Avalon, and is a quiet literary beauty. Therefore, when Orgrim went out, he usually took Monet with him as his little secretary. On the pier of the port, both Indigo and Caesar were standing here. Caesar's Dark Research Institute was set up in Melview, and both Shiki and Orgrim spent a lot of money on it. Therefore, even if Indigo's research has been completed, Caesar has not done anything like Nan. Just like Dingle, he returned directly to Avalon. He was still living in Melview, studying his mess of evil things. This is good. Orgrim has no intention of letting Caesar go to Avalon. Because what this guy is researching is too dangerous. If there is an accident, it will be destroyed just like Punk Hasid. How nice is Melview, it's so vast and sparsely populated, so I'm not afraid of his pretentiousness. At this time, Orgrim was thinking that after the matter with Boss Shiji was settled, he would make scientific investment in Melview and turn it into a cutting-edge technology research institute. It would be best to make it like the country of the future. Of course, this is still a century-old project, so just think that there is too much money and nowhere to spend it. Seeing Orgrim walking over, Caesar and Indigo rushed to greet him, ready to say hello or something. But before the two scientific researchers could speak, Orgrim stretched out his hand and pressed it, and both of them immediately shut up when they saw this. Jun went to inspect G-3 and G-4? Orgrim asked. Monet, who was following him, quickly flipped through the notebook in his hand, and then said yes, Mr. Planck said so, and he also has eyewitness information, saying it is to inspect the construction status of two naval fortresses. Orgrim frowned slightly, and then asked how long has that woman stayed in the two fortresses. Could Master Zui be jealous? Monet thought a little funny in her heart. After all, she knew that the Navy inspector in Jun had some strange situations with her boss. Although Ding was dissatisfied in his heart, Monet still said quickly, I didn't stay too long in G-3 fortress. I stayed in G-4 for less than half a day, but I stayed for 2 days. G-4 it's the fortress that Porosalino was supervising to build, right? Orgrim asked again. Yes, it is Admiral Kizaru Porosalino of the Navy headquarters, Monet responded again. Orgrim nodded, stretched out his hand to touch his chin, and walked towards the outside of the port without stopping. Indigo and Caesar looked at each other helplessly. At one glance, everyone hurriedly followed Orgrim and walked out. After thinking for a while, Orgrim said softly, it seems that there will be trouble within the Navy. I'm afraid it won't work. This guy from Warring States period, rather, he is a chicken thief. Monet asked in surprise, what do you mean, will there be civil strife in the Navy? It was possible before. After all, Kuzin and Sakaski would compete for the position of Navy Marshal. You don't know. It seems that the three generals are in harmony. In fact, Kuzin and Sakaski are incompatible. Originally, I thought that this battle for marshals would become very fierce, and even more complicated with Jun joining in. Now, I think Kuzin, that wavering guy, will quit. Orgrim smiled and said. Monet, Indigo, and Caesar all looked surprised. Orgrim ignored them and continued, if Kuzin withdraws, only Jun and Sa. If Kaski competes for the marshal, the internal conflicts in the Navy will dissipate a lot, and the factional struggles will not be too fierce, and, from the current point of view, Sakaski has little chance of winning. Why? Monet was confused again. Jun, well, although she is also a veteran naval expert whose qualifications are not inferior to those of Sakaski and others, in the final analysis, she is just a lieutenant general and a chief inspector now. Sakaski has been in the position of general for many years. His prestige is not worse than Jun, and his foundation in the headquarters is even much stronger than Jun, right? Even if Jun wants to compete, it seems, it should be that Sakaski has a greater advantage than her, right? Also, how did you, Mr. Hammer, conclude that Kuzin would quit? Orgrim did not want to explain what Kuzin meant, and smiled evilly. Jun was originally not qualified to compete for the position of marshal, but now, she happens to have it. Why is this? What? Monet asked curiously. Because of the support of the naval marshal Senguo, otherwise even if she returned to the headquarters, she would not be able to overtake and become the chief inspector. Her current status means that Senguo has made a new bet, and what is more interesting is that, Orgrim paused after saying this, with a playful smile on his lips. What's more interesting, Monet still asked tirelessly. What's even more interesting is that before Sengoku changed his mind and made a new bet, I happened to help Jun with the upper-level relations. In other words, the positions of the admiral and the world government were consistent. In this case, Sokka's how can G fight with Jun? He might have thought that the higher UPS would support him, right? So sad, but I also made a mistake and was taken advantage of by this guy Senguo. Orgrim shook his head and said with some emotion. He supported Jun before. On the one hand, it was because his relationship with Jun had improved and he even slept with her. He should give some feedback. On the other hand, in fact, he originally wanted to muddy the waters of the Navy. But after all, time was a little rushed at that time, and Orgrim failed to think carefully, and there were many gaps in it. So much so that Warring States, a wily guy, seized this opportunity in one fell swoop and took advantage of Orgrim with his backhand. If Orgrim hadn't been messing around, the Navy's internal conflicts and power struggles will probably become even more terrifying. Now Jun not only does not continue to muddy the waters of the Navy, but it actually feels like a needle in the sea. The internal situation of the Navy was stabilized. Monet was still confused and couldn't understand much. After Orgrim took 2 steps, he smiled again and said, but that's okay. If you do this in Warring States, you will crush Sakazuki to death. In this way, the one who originally had the greatest chance of winning will he, on the other hand, has the least chance. With Sakazuki's strong character, will he give up? He will definitely fight until the last moment. Now that he has no way to go, can he only make meritorious deeds? What kind of merit are you doing? Gee ha 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 ha, it fell into my hands again. Orgrim was talking to himself here and laughing. Monet didn't understand what he was talking about at all. He could only sigh secretly. The boss is the boss. If he doesn't understand, it must be his own problem. Throwing these thoughts away, Orgrim no longer speculated on the situation of the Navy. On the contrary, he became more confident in his plan. Only then did Orgrim chat with Caesar and Indigo with a smile. Get up. It's been a while since I last saw you. You two did a great job. You really fulfilled Boss Shiji's long-cherished wish. Orgrim reached out and patted Caesar and Indigo on the shoulders. At the same time, he was also observing Indigo's expression. Sure enough, Indigo smiled, but there was a little regret in his eyes. Caesar was a very happy guy. He was nagging Orgrim and wanted to increase some funds. He also said he wanted to go on vacation. In the early years, when he first came into contact with Orgrim, he was trepidatious. Now, this guy has become a little more greasy and not so afraid of Orgrim. Orgrim didn't refuse anything, and generously agreed to Caesar's needs in all aspects, and also strongly recommended him to take a vacation to the Golden City. After chatting with Caesar for a while, Orgrim turned around and asked Indigo, what is Boss Shiji thinking about recently? Indigo 5.7 did not hide anything, and said softly, Master Hammer, Admiral, he should be hesitating. After a short pause, Indigo said again, I think the Admiral just wants a step, and you have to give it to him. Orgrim is somewhat clear about this. Before, he didn't know Shiji's mentality, but Indigo has been following Shiji for decades, and he knows more about Shiji. As soon as he opened his mouth, Orgrim understood that Shiji actually didn't want to move, but he just felt that the bragging he had done 20 years ago was not going to end well. That's fine, I can do a lot more easily. Gee ha 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 ha, okay, I understand. Orgrim patted Indigo on the shoulder again and said. After that, Orgrim said to Monet, give me the phone bug. Monet quickly handed the phone bug to Orgrim. Orgrim fiddled with it twice and called out. After a while, Doflamingo's voice came from the phone bug. Got it? Foo, Mr. Chui, what are your orders? Doflamingo said with a smile. It sounded like he was in a good mood. Orgrim didn't talk nonsense. He smiled and said, Dover, tell your good friend in the Navy. Having said that, it's time to give Sakaski a blow dry. Doflamingo's eyes lit up and he said to the phone bug, understood, leave it to me. Underscore. To read the underlined version of the novel. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 704. Naval Headquarters Marineford. In the tavern in the living area, Virgo had just finished answering the phone call and came out of the bathroom. In the hall of the tavern, there were also several lieutenant generals from the Navy headquarters sitting there. If you look closely, you will see that they are all Hawk Marines, such as Doberman and Ghost Spider. Now the intelligence level of Marineford has been raised to a very high level, that is, the living area, where the signals of strange phone calls will not be intercepted. But it will still be monitored. Fortunately, Doflamingo also changed his relationship a few times. The signal came from Maragio's intermediary. After Fergo answered the phone, he heard the code and hung up without saying a word. But in his heart, he already understood. After sitting back at the wine table, the surrounding lieutenants didn't think much. Who can't go to the toilet yet? What's more, Fergo has never made a mistake in so many years, and no one will doubt him without reason. Although several vice admirals are sitting here drinking, it seems that they are not in a very high mood. That big inspector is really smart, did you hear that? General Kingsley is ready to let go. Doberman said. As soon as he finished speaking, the expressions of the two lieutenant generals, Ghost Spider and Dalmatian, were slightly unhappy. As a newcomer, Fergo was also observing the expressions of the other three and did not speak. The Grand Inspector is also qualified, not to mention that when she comes back this time, she will hold the rank of General. Domiting finally said this. Although he is also a Hawk Navy, the Hawk Navy is also divided into grades. Dalmatian is not as tough as Ghost Spider and Sakaski. Lieutenant General Ghost Spider sighed a little while holding a cigarette in his mouth. He said in a tone, the situation has changed so fast that we are all confused, but one thing can be confirmed, that is, our situation is not good. General, what plans does he have? Fergo asked at this time. As soon as he finished speaking, the other three people shook their heads slightly. Doberman said softly, if the general had any arrangements, we wouldn't sit here chatting like this. Yes, we have already gone to work. It is because the general has not done anything that we are a little anxious. The general's presence in the headquarters seems to have a stable foundation, but in fact, there are many restrictions, Lieutenant General Ghost Spider also said helplessly. Doberman and Dalmatian both nodded, looking helpless. Virgo pretended to be hesitant, and then said in a while, I will be transferred to G-3. It will be easier to do anything there, and I am the base commander. Whatever comes in handy, you guys are welcome. Ghost Spider, Doberman, and Dalmatian all smiled kindly, but these guys looked so ferocious when they left. But AG-3, it feels a bit, of course, Virgo, don't worry, I'm just talking casually, Doberman said again. He was not malicious and deliberately disgusted Virgo. This guy really has this outspoken character and can't hide his words. Virgo thought to himself, of course I am an undercover agent and will not care about the nonsense you say. Smiled and nodded, and then said, in my opinion, if the general doesn't do anything now, he will only become more and more passive. We all know this, and the general must also know it. Doberman said again. Lieutenant General Ghost Spider also nodded and said softly, it's just that the general can't find the direction. The Grand Inspector's methods seem light and easy, but in fact, you really can't find any point of counterattack. You still have to make meritorious deeds, Virgo said casually. However, the other three lieutenant generals nodded in agreement with his words. The hawkish navy is so upright. Even if they are caught in this kind of situation, they will not give Sakaski any insidious ideas to clean up Jun or something. What I think in my heart is that it is better to win with an upright and unstoppable momentum. To make meritorious service, to put it simply, it is the most difficult to do now. You have all seen the situation in this department. It is obvious that a big move is needed, and the general is trapped here. How can he make meritorious service if he cannot enter the New World? I think the only thing that can make a comeback is this war with the New World pirates. We all have to work hard to show off the general's merits. The foundation of the Grand Inspectorate headquarters is not as deep as ours. In this war, she should be better than we want the disadvantaged, Doberman said after thinking about it. Dalmatian and Ghost Spider both nodded, seeming to think that Doberman was right. Whether they can make a comeback depends on this war. If they make a great contribution and defeat the pirates of the New World, things will turn around. Virgo naturally nodded first, then pretended to want to say something, and then his expression showed some concern. Finally, he shook his head imperceptibly, then put on a wry smile, picked up the wine glass and said, "Here. Come on, have a drink." As a pirate who has been undercover in the Navy for many years, this subtle acting skill is a perfect score. Doberman and others, of course, also noticed Virgo's change, but they did not speak directly. Instead, they followed Virgo's wishes, picked up their wine glasses, clinked them with each other, and started drinking. After eating some appetizers, chatting about other things, and drinking a few glasses of wine, Doberman finally couldn't help it anymore and looked at Virgo and said, "Brother Virgo, did you just want to say something? We are all our own people. If you have a good idea, don't hide it." Dalmatian also reached out and patted Virgo on the shoulder, and then said, "Yes, Virgo." Lieutenant General Ghost Spider did not speak, but his eyes were full of inquiry. Virgo was stunned for a moment, then quickly waved his hand and said, "What ideas do I have? Inappropriate, inappropriate." After a few excuses, Lieutenant General Ghost Spider finally said, "Is it suitable? Let's talk about it first. It's better than nothing. This feeling of sitting back and waiting for death is too uncomfortable." Doberman and Dalmatian both nodded. Seeing this, Virgo said awkwardly, "That's right, I have an immature idea." After a long time, Virgo finished what he said. Seeing that the other three lieutenant generals were all deep in thought, he did not continue to speak and just drank by himself. After a while, Vice Admiral Ghost Spider said, "Where did you hear that? That guy named Teach is the successor of the Whitebeard pirates? How do we, never heard of it?" Virgo smiled and said, "Didn't I go on a mission to the Golden City earlier, where I happened to see this guy named Teach, and then I inquired about the news there. This guy was so crazy that he told people everywhere in the casino that he was going to take over the Whitebeard class." Speaking of this, Virgo stopped talking. The other three lieutenant generals started thinking again. Thinking about it carefully, it seems that it is not impossible. The sudden appearance of a second division captain in the Whitebeard pirates is already very suspicious. According to this idea, maybe this guy from the second team, the man named Teach, really wants to take over from Whitebeard? Is it the hidden weapon that the Whitebeard pirates have hidden for so many years? Although there were some doubts in his heart, Lieutenant General Ghost Spider finally shook his head and said, "What do you think? It's not suitable, so forget it and let's think of something else." Virgo didn't pay attention, nodded and said, "I didn't say it just now, because I thought it might not be appropriate. It's nothing." They didn't drink too much. Soon after the cocktail party ended, Virgo and the four vice admirals returned to the military headquarters together. After they dispersed, Lieutenant General Ghost Spider walked on the streets of Marineford, feeling a little bit in his heart. After thinking about it, he finally turned around and walked towards General Sakaski's courtyard. He felt that what Virgo said was a bit outrageous, but he didn't have any other ideas now. It was best to communicate with the general. "Well, the generals have more resources than them, and it is easy to check. Let's see what is going on with Teach. If he is really the guy that Whitebeard used to train as his heir. Find a way to set up a trap, catch him, and then kill the Whitebeard pirates. This fantastic idea is not impossible, right? If one of the 4 emperors can be killed, the general's merits will be more stable. When the time comes, he may not be able to compete with the Grand Inspector of Jun. Is it appropriate to start now? The headquarters here wants. But then I thought about it, and it seemed like there was nothing inappropriate. Isn't it natural for the Navy to catch pirates? On the other side, in Melview, New World. With a smile on his face, Orgrim walked into Shiji's courtyard for the first time in a long time. There is no change from back then, except that the tree in the yard seems to be thicker. As soon as he took a closer look, he saw Boss Shiji lying on the rocking chair with his eyes closed, as if he was basking in the sun or taking a nap. This scene made Orgrim feel a little emotional. It was really rare to see Shiji without any edges or sharpness. Just after taking 2 steps, Shiji suddenly opened his eyes, turned his head and glanced, and saw Orgrim's tall and strong figure clearly, with a smile on his lips. He sat up from the rocking chair, first looked up at the treetops, there was no newspaper on them, and then looked at Orgrim and whispered, "Why are you here?" Orgrim said with a smile. "As I said, Melview is also my home. Isn't my yard still there after all these years? Why can't I come here?" "Humph, I've never seen you so attentive before." Shiji snorted coldly at first, and then reached for the tea on the table next to the rocking chair. He touched it lightly with his finger, frowned slightly, "Good money," and the tea cooled. However, although Shiji is a very particular pirate with a very elegant style, in the final analysis, he is still a pirate, and he is not so pretentious that he cannot drink the tea when it is cold. So I was still going to pick up the tea and take a sip. Orgrim was very discerning, so he quickly took 3 steps at a time, grabbed Shiji's wrist, and said, "Looking at you like this, is it appropriate?" "Shiji, what the hell are you talking about? This tea is already cold and you are old. If you drink it randomly, it will hurt your stomach. Do you think you are not afraid of this like me?" Orgrim muttered, and then took the tea away. He didn't pay attention to the flowers and plants around him, and poured the tea on the ground. Then he turned around and walked into the house. After struggling for a while, he brought a pot of hot water, tea, and walked out with 2 cups. Sitting on another chair next to Shiji, Orgrim poured 2 cups of hot tea, handed one to Shiji and said, "While I'm away, can you pay more attention? Lest I have to be busy coming back to attend your funeral someday." Shiji glared at Orgrim, picked up the hot tea, blew it, took a sip and said, "If you show courtesy, you should show it well, and you still curse at me. I also want to save face to some extent." Orgrim also picked up the tea and took a sip, and said with a smile. "Snort." Shiji snorted in displeasure, but did not continue to murmur about Orgrim. After drinking the sip of tea, it was indeed very comfortable. To read the underlined version of the novel. A Sledgehammer Breaks into Pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 705. Orgrim sat here, drinking tea and basking in the sun with Shiji, without saying anything. Speaking of which, Orgrim hasn't been in the sun for a long time. After all, Avalon is a dark place where the sun always sets. Therefore, the skin of the Avalonians will become whiter over time, and there will be more beauties. After all, one white skin will cover up 3 ugly ones. However, nature is magical. The trace elements released by the plants on the island can effectively replace sunlight and prevent people from being exposed to the sun for a long time. But no matter what, sometimes sunbathing is really a kind of enjoyment. Orgrim was enjoying this feeling now. Shiji was holding hot tea in his hand. After taking a sip, he suddenly said with emotion, "How long has it been since you came back, After hearing this, Orgrim thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Remember, I don't know, and I don't remember if I came back after I left. Anyway, it must have been several years, right?" "I can't remember clearly either," Shiji smiled and said. "You are different from me, you are older," Orgrim said with a laugh. As soon as he finished speaking, Boss Shiji glared at Orgrim fiercely. Orgrim didn't care, he still looked very thick-skinned. "You haven't changed much," Shiji suddenly said this. "What changed?" Orgrim raised his eyebrows and asked. "Looks like, you are over 40 this year, right?" Shiji asked softly. "It is impolite to ask a man his age casually," Orgrim muttered. Shiji glared at Orgrim again, with some displeasure in his eyes. Orgrim then said with a smile, "Well, he is over 40. Yes, when I first met you, you were only in your teens. In a blink of an eye, you are already over 40. But looking at your appearance, it feels like you were set in your mid-20s, Shiji said with a somewhat sad tone. "Gee, ha 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 ha, my wife at home is amazing, she has secrets, do you want to listen?" Orgrim laughed and said. Queen Stussy is indeed a beautiful girl who is fascinated by her age. After being together for so long, Orgrim has not seen any wrinkles on her. It is simply outrageous. But as for Orgrim's appearance, it actually has nothing to do with Her Majesty the Queen. In fact, Her Majesty the Queen is also very surprised why Orgrim's appearance has not improved since he reached the age of 27 or 80 years old. And often observing Orgrim, I found that there is nothing special about this guy. He stays up late, drinks, smokes, and goes out to fight and kill. He eats the same as everyone else, and even loves to eat meat. There is no sense of maintenance. But he seemed very young. In the end, the Queen attributed this phenomenon to Orgrim's talent and physical fitness. She was secretly envious of it. Thinking of this, Orgrim remembered, once again, at night, Her Majesty the Queen suddenly said something like, no matter what happened, time would not be enough. In the next 2 days, Her Majesty the Queen's mood did not seem to be very good. At that time, Orgrim didn't react. At this moment, he understood what the Queen meant. She was scared. This youthful enchantress is afraid of time. Pure gold, Tetsalo needs to keep an eye on him. Has that guy built a treasure hunting fleet? Orgrim thought in his heart. After the Golden City project was implemented, it was running smoothly, making money every day. But Tetsalo is a very hard-working guy who can't stand loneliness. Just like when he was the president of the Dark Bank of Avalon, he had already begun to think about the plan to build the Golden City. Now that he has built the Golden City, the world's #1 entertainment city, he has begun to think about other industries. How to create wealth for the Warhammer pirates. Perhaps in the entire Warhammer Pirates system, T0 is the one who is most obsessed with gold and wealth. The rest of the Warhammer Pirates members are all obsessed with gold and wealth. It's like he has no interest in these yellow and white things. Now Orgrim can pat his chest and say openly that I have no interest in money. I never have, ahem fork. In short, Tetsalo regards gold and Bailey as his own sense of security. The more the better, the more good words will never exist, and the idea of earning enough will never exist. Now that he thinks about it, Orgrim remembers that once, Tetsalo reported that he was going to invest in treasure hunters in the next field. I guess it's already in operation by now, right? There are also a lot of treasure hunters on the sea, and they even occasionally play guest roles with pirates. Today I am a treasure hunter, but tomorrow I may be a pirate. Anyway, it is an industry that has nothing to do with justice and light. Although it is not particularly evil, it is still an industry where everyone is considered ruthless. This kind of treasure hunter makes a living by seeking to explore the hidden treasures in the sea. Treasures appear one after another on the sea. This is all thanks to the pirates. Due to the lack of sense of security in the pirate industry, a large number of pirates will actually start to seek wealth after finding that there is no hope of reaching the top. They want to accumulate a lot of wealth, and then find a safe place to wash their hands and go ashore to become a rich man. Generally, after having this idea, pirates will hide the wealth they plundered in some weird places and create a treasure map or something. Over the years, there will be more and more of these places, and the wealth inside them will also increase. But pirates are a high-risk profession after all, and everyone works with their heads hanging on their belts. Maybe if you hide your wealth today, you may die tomorrow. Therefore, the treasures of these pirate captains are really countless on the sea. The most famous among them is Captain John, who was once a member of the Rocks Pirates. This guy made a lot of treasures, and there are still legends circulating on the sea. In addition to these most common pirate treasures, there are also some treasures with even more astonishing wealth, such as Sandora, the land of gold that Orgrim and the others once found on the empty island. This is a real windfall. As famous as Sandora, the land of gold, there is also the Sea of Gemstones and the City of Jade on the sea. The Sea of Gemstones is rumored to be crystal clear, but it is covered with colorful gemstones, and the accumulated wealth is unbelievable. The Emerald City is rumored to be a city made of emeralds, similar to the land of gold. In short, it is full of wealth. Tetzalo felt that these wealth could not be buried, so he prepared to get involved in this industry to find these wealth. Not to mention, he did an impressive job, because a lot of wealth and treasures were lost in the sea over time. But ordinary treasure hunters, even if they find the location where the treasure is hidden, can't get into the deep sea, which is often thousands of meters or 10,000 meters deep. We can only let this wealth never see the light of day. But Tetzalo is different. He has raised a group of treasure hunting expedition teams, and at the same time he has the fisherman resources of Fishman Island. Cooperation benefits both sides. Perhaps this industry also allowed him to make a lot of money for the Warhammer pirates. Of course, Orgrim really doesn't know how much it is. After all, for him now, money, it's really just a number. Pure gold also falls into the category of treasures. As I said when I was chatting with Doflamingo, immortality is not something that can only be achieved by the fruits of surgery. Orgrim was unwilling to use this method because he was not the kind of person who would sacrifice the lives of his companions for such a thing. In contrast, there are legends such as the Fountain of Youth in the sea, and there are also more weird legends of immortality. Asking for flowers. Pure gold is also one of them, and in Orgrim's view, it is a more reliable one, because this thing is controllable immortality. If you don't want to live anymore, you can still experience the feeling of growing old slowly if you take off the pure gold, and eventually turn into a handful of Lois. The other methods are either to be killed or to commit suicide directly. This style is very different. Orgrim is now thinking that he should make arrangements for Tetzalo when he returns. Don't be so tacky. What's the point of just staring at those ordinary belongings? We should look for some of these legendary things, such as pure gold, the Fountain of Youth, etc. There are so many thoughts in my mind, but reality only lasts a moment. Boss Shiji didn't know that Orgrim's thoughts had wandered for who knows how far. Instead, he said to himself, I don't need this kind of thing. Birth, old age, illness, and death. The laws of nature. Having said this, he paused for a moment and said, now, I am no longer a person who refuses to accept old age. Orgrim put his thoughts away and said, this is actually quite good. Boss Shiji, you have already obtained and tasted everything you should have and enjoy. You have stood at the top, and you have when you hit rock bottom, your life is really wonderful. Next, let's savor it carefully. It's also very good. 0. Snort. Shiji didn't listen to Orgrim's nonsense. He snorted coldly at first, and then said, you are just afraid that I will go to sea again and cause trouble for you, right? To be honest, I do have this concern. Orgrim said without any politeness. The master-disciple relationship between him and Shiji can even be said to be a father-son relationship. In some things, there is really no need to be pretentious. Before Shiji could speak, Orgrim continued. Times have changed, Admiral. He rarely used the title of Admiral for those subordinate to Shiji. Shiji also looked a little sad. I have long said that I will inherit you and then surpass you. You see, now I have done it. On this sea, in terms of pirates alone, I, Orgrim, am already standing at the highest level. This is you. You should be proud, right? Because without meeting you, I, Orgrim, would not have reached this point. You are my master and I am your disciple, Orgrim said softly. Lion disciples, there was a slight smile on the corner of Xianshiji's mouth. This is the name Orgrim had a long time ago. At that time, he worked under Shiji's banner and walked the sea as Shiji's disciple. He was called the disciple of the lion by everyone. This was all a long time ago. Now that I think about it, I really miss it a little bit. Yes, although no one calls me the lion disciple anymore, Admiral, I, Orgrim, am not an ungrateful person. I will never forget that I was once the lion disciple. Therefore, if you go to sea now, yes, what to do? Are you competing for the hegemony of the sea with your most proud disciple, Hosgarot Orgrim? Isn't this unnecessary? It sounds strange. Orgrim took a sip of tea and said with a smile. Huh, sweet talk, Shiji snorted again. But after the hum ended, his expression became calmer. You are right, Orgrim. I understand all these principles, Shiki whispered softly. But ambition, as a golden lion who once roared all over the world, Shiji's ambition is still a little restless after all. 20 years ago, the bullshit that was boasted has not yet been realized. After Orgrim heard this, he was silent for a moment, and then said, speaking of which, I haven't had any contact with you, Admiral, for a long time. Are you interested in mentoring my disciple? Shiji's expression was a little surprised at first, and then the corner of his mouth with a hint of unruly smile, he said, okay, just let me see, you are the strongest in the world, what progress have you made? Underscore. To read the underlined version of the novel. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 706. Melview is not a floating island, but a towering slender mountain. It is so steep that almost no one can climb it. It is much higher than the Red Earth continent. But there are indeed several islands, large and small, floating around Melview. These islands were captured by Boss Shiji using his abilities. Speaking of which, Boss Shiji's interest seems to lie in this. He likes to find islands with beautiful scenery and take them away when he likes them. Therefore, with Melview as the center, a circle of fairyland floating islands with quite beautiful scenery is formed. At this time, on a small boat on the edge of Melview Island, Indigo and Caesar were sitting very leisurely on the boat. There were also some drinks and snacks on the boat. It looked like these two guys were having an outing. However, one of them looks weirder than the other, and they are both men. They look a bit gay and a bit gay. From their position, looking into the distance, they could see sword energy and shock waves erupting on an island in the distance of Melview. There is no doubt that Orgrim and Shiji are fighting on that island. Taking a sip from the wine glass, Indigo said with some emotion, in the past, this kind of thing often happened in Melview. Caesar came relatively late. When he joined Orgrim's staff, Orgrim was no longer hanging out in Melview and went to work in Avalon. When he robbed the Imperial prison and rescued Boss Shiji, he happened to be hanging around too. It was also at that time that he joined the Warhammer Pirates. Therefore, he had not seen this kind of scene in Melview, and he was still a little curious at this time. Did Mr. Chui often challenge the Admiral back then? Caesar asked. Indigo shook his head, and then said not really. You may not believe it. At that time, Mr. Hammer often spent time in the library. Library? Caesar was stunned again. There is a library in Melview, but it's just average, right? Avalon's big library is amazing. It contains professional knowledge from almost all walks of life. Caesar used to. I often go there to read scriptures. In Caesar's opinion, it may be the library with the richest collection of books and knowledge in the world after O'Hara's Tree of Omniscient fell. Listening to Nightingale, it seems that the big book the museum will be expanded every 3 to 5 years, and billions of burials will be spent every year to purchase a large number of knowledge books from all over the world to fill it. The person in charge seems to be Miss Robin from Mr. Chewy's family. Ah, I haven't talked to you before. The Great Library of Avalon was actually in Melview. The Admiral was also a person who liked collecting books. To be honest, if he hadn't been a pirate, he would have been there. In many aspects, there will definitely be quite high achievements. Well, maybe Master Hammer also developed this habit with the Admiral. After the Admiral was imprisoned, Master Hammer moved to Avalon, and he also moved the Great Library in Melview. Therefore, Avalon's large library was actually based on Melview and gradually expanded, Indigo said with a smile. Caesar nodded with some understanding. It turns out that there are still these things. Did you just say that this happens often? Caesar asked again. My hawk. Brother Indigo smiled nostalgically, and then said the greatest swordsman in the world today was also taught by the Admiral. What? My hawk is also a disciple of the lion? Caesar asked in surprise. Indigo's expression was a little subtle, and he said vaguely just so. Of course my hawk is not a disciple of the lion, and his swordsmanship was not actually taught by Shiji step by step. Indigo was just bragging to his admiral. However, his vague words are not an embarrassment. After all, my hawk did benefit a lot from Shiji at the stage when he really grew up. Without letting Caesar continue to ask, Indigo quickly said, you don't know, at that time, the admirals were afraid. My hawk was really scary. What's the meaning? At that time, my hawk was already able to communicate with the admiral, black and white. Caesar was shocked and said. Is the strength of the first swordsman so strong? Indigo waved his hand again and said with a smile, that's not true, but my hawk is more stubborn. Hammer, maybe after a month or two, I will gain something and understand something, and then I will discuss it with the admiral, but my hawk, he also believed in using the sword to speak 1,000 words and communicate with the sword, so he would challenge the admiral almost every now and then. In the end, he forced the admiral to leave Avalon and seek refuge. Then what? Wei Sa asked again. Then, Master Chui fooled my hawk for a while, and finally tricked my hawk away from Melview. From then on, my hawk developed this habit of wandering around the world, Indigo said with some emotion again. Thinking about it carefully, it seems that this is really the case. Let alone my hawk before he joined the Warhammer pirates in the capital of Seven Waters. But after joining, for a long time, he was not a very promiscuous person until he came to Melview and was tricked out by Orgrim and Shiski, and then he got out of hand. He became a prodigal through and through, leading him to wander around wherever he is now. Orgrim doesn't even know, he seems to have gone to the East China Sea. But it's been so long, he must have left the East China Sea long ago, right? I don't know if the matter is finished. In short, he is in the state of a prodigal, and occasionally uses the phone bug contact Beckman or Planck to prove that he is still alive. The rest of the time, there is no news at all. It's amazing what he did after seeing it in the newspaper. In fact, it is quite interesting to recall this. At that time, our Sky Pirates and the Golden Lion Fleet were at their most powerful. Even Roger and Whitebeard were 3 points behind us. Kaido and Charlotte Lingling can't even take the lead and can only be regarded as a silver medalist, The admiral dominates the world and is a well-deserved pirate overlord. If, having said this, Indigo's expression became a little more complicated. What if, Caesar continued to ask. Alas, I have been thinking about how majestic and heroic the admiral would have looked if he had never met Roger. All the turning points started from the day Roger boarded the Pirate King. When Indigo said this, his tone was slightly angry. In his opinion, Roger is not worthy of being the Pirate King at all. A pirate is not an adventurer, let alone a geographer. How could he inexplicably become a pirate after finding Rafdru and traveling around the Grand Line? One Piece? Pirates should speak with strength and power. In that era, if we had to find a king, it should be his admiral. After Roger became king, the admiral's heart seemed to have cooled down. At that time, I discovered that something was wrong. The admiral, who was keen on external expansion and launching wars, seemed to have lost interest in these. He had been secretly looking for Roger. But the Roger pirates have been disbanded, and not even the world government can find it, let alone us, Indigo said with a somewhat sad tone. Caesar didn't speak, just listened quietly, listening to the story of the former pirate hero and pirate overlord. Until that day, Roger was arrested, you know. The admiral's expression after learning the news was so terrifying, ferocious, evil, and furious. It seemed as if everyone who stood in front of him would be swallowed up by his anger. It's a pity that on that day, perhaps the only person who could stop him was Lord Hammer, so no one could stop the admiral's anger. From here, he went to Marineford, the headquarters of the Navy, Indigo said regretfully. Caesar then took over the words, nodded and said, I know this. The admiral fought with Garp and Sengoku for 3 days and 3 nights in Marineford, destroying most of Marineford, at last. In the end, he was defeated there and imprisoned in Impelton. Thanks to Master Hammer, the admiral was able to get out of it. Brother Indigo didn't have any worries and just said it directly. Right, Caesar nodded quickly. Prosperity and decline, that was the beginning of prosperity and decline. From that day on, Master Chui embarked on his own hegemony, while the admiral's hegemony stagnated on that day. No, let's go back and look at Melview. Except for us, there is not much life left, but more than 20 years ago, this was the center of the pirate world. Once the Golden Lion flag is raised, there are countless heroes who are willing to die for the admiral. When Indigo said this, he couldn't help but wave his arms. Then, his expression showed unwillingness, regret, and pain, but in the end, it all turned into a relieved smile. I saw him whispering softly, he murmured, but, fortunately, it is Master Chui. Fortunately, the person who finally stood in the position of admiral is Master Chui. Lion disciples, passed down from one generation to the next, we have always been the strongest. Yes, the Golden Lion lineage has always been the strongest. I know that the admiral is also very complicated in his heart. He is a little unwilling, but he also thinks that this is good. After all, it is Orgrim and Lord Hammer who have taken over this future. I think he must be able to let it go, Indigo smiled and said. At the same time, on the island where Shiski and Orgrim fought, a slash flew out from the 2 swords in Shiji's hand, and wherever the slash passed, all obstacles were cut into 2. Many years ago, Nightingale had removed the rudder from Shiji's head. Therefore, his strength has also recovered a lot, but after all, he is old and has hidden injuries. It is impossible to think about the peak, but he is still very powerful. When he moved his hands, he could still destroy the world, but in his movements, he had the air of being the best in the world. Orgrim did not carry a warhammer, and faced this fierce 590 blow. He did not show any weakness at all. He punched it fiercely, and the powerful impact shattered the blow in the air. They did not use any domineering power. Both of them were superhuman ability users, so there was no need to use any domineering power during the sparring session. Because Orgrim knew very well that if he used the power of domineering, his admiral was no match for him. There was a crackling exchange of blows, and there was a flash of light in Shiji's eyes. The Yingshi in his hand formed a flower shadow, and when he was about to pierce Orgrim's chest at an extremely tricky angle, Orgrim Mu unexpectedly grabbed Yingju's blade. Without the protection of the domineering force, the sharp blade cut through Orgrim's palm, bringing with it a dazzling scarlet blood flower. The tip of the knife finally stopped in front of Orgrim's heart. It wasn't Orgrim who caught it, but Shiki loosened his grip. The battle didn't last long, but from the moment Orgrim caught his Yingshi, he knew that he had lost. Because whenever Orgrim uses a little bit of domineering power, his face will not look good. Neither of them moved at first, just looking at each other quietly. After about 3 to 5 breaths, Shiji let go, and Yingshi was pinched in Orgrim's hand with blood stains on it. "You're really old. If you get serious, I'm afraid I won't be able to hold on for long," Shiji suddenly said. "Perhaps," Orgrim made an estimate in his mind, and then said 500 collisions is the most. "If it doesn't exceed this number, I will definitely win." He also felt that his admirals had all fallen to the top masters. This threshold edge has passed, that is, the experience and tolerance are holding it up. In other words, Doflamingo can come and fight Shiki for 300 rounds. His admiral is really old. "Orgrim, time, is there no ship that can carry me?" Shiji suddenly asked. "No more, Admiral," Orgrim said without hesitation. But as soon as he finished speaking, he laughed again and said, "But the black narwhal will always leave a place for you." "Gee ha 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 ha, the most correct decision I have ever made in my life is to let you be my disciple." Shiji listened to Orgrim's words and suddenly laughed boldly. This smile seemed to dissipate all the depression in his heart. Underscore to read the underlined version of the novel. A Sledgehammer Breaks into Pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 707. When Orgrim arrived at Melview, it was exactly noon, and Shiki was taking a nap there in the sun. After that, the two of them tossed around for a while, even moved their hands and had a discussion. By the time we returned to Melview, it was already darkening and it was time for dinner. Yingshi's sword, stained with Orgrim's blood, has been hung on Shiji's waist again. But after Boss Shiji walked into the courtyard, he patted the saber on his waist, and the two famous swords, Kumu and Yingshi, flew aside. As for Orgrim's hand, it has already been healed, and his current physique is so strong. Indigo and Caesar, two gay friends, had also finished rafting. As soon as Shiki and Orgrim entered the door, they saw these two guys setting the table. The food has been served, and there is also a jug of wine, soaking in warm water, ready to drink at any time. It can be seen that Mihawk and other young pirates like to drink red wine, but Roger, Whitebeard, and Shiji all prefer drinking white wine. "Admiral, Master Chui, you are back." Indigo said hello with a smile. Today, he is less restrained. Even Caesar seems to be more relaxed. Shiki and Orgrim don't care about this. With a slight change in attitude, they each nodded and found a seat to sit down. Neither Indigo nor Caesar asked about the result of the competition just now. Because there was no need to ask. Could the Admiral still win? After sitting down, Shiji was not polite at all. He didn't even say hello to Orgrim. He directly picked up the chopsticks, took some vegetables from the plate, and started eating by himself. Orgrim was also not polite. "I used to live in Melview for several years. This place is just like his home." How polite is he? He just picked up the chopsticks and started eating, and even greeted Indigo and Caesar. After a few words, the four of them sat down to eat together. After eating a few mouthfuls, Shiji tapped his foot lightly, and an inexplicable energy spread out. The empty wine glass placed in front of Ogre flew away in an instant. After getting up, the cork of the wine bottle placed in the warm water automatically popped out, and a fragrant smell of wine wafted out. There was no particularly strong wine flavor. I have to say that Boss Shiji's style is really very good. The taste is completely different from that of ordinary pirates. Under the influence of inexplicable energy, the wine bottle poured wine into several people's empty glasses. After taking the wine glass, Orgrim smiled at the corner of his mouth. Before Shiji could speak, he said, "Come on, Boss Shiji, I'd like to toast you with this glass of wine. Thank you for taking care of us back then. I can't thank you enough. Anyway, I am Orgrim." Seeing that Orgrim was going to say some empty words, Shiji waved his hands in annoyance, but he still raised his wine glass to have a drink with Orgrim. When Orgrim saw this, he stopped talking nonsense and drank all the wine in the cup. As soon as the warm drink entered my mouth, I couldn't hold it back and went straight into my stomach. There is no doubt that this is a great wine. However, Orgrim doesn't like drinking very much, so his understanding of wine is only average. If my hawk is left here, he might be able to chat with Shiji. After all, this guy is so hot that he can make wine by himself. Got it? I have no use for artificial ancient weapons or anything like that, Shiji suddenly said after putting down the wine glass. Orgrim grinned, with a smile on his face. Isn't this natural? It is obvious that Shiji has no intention of going to sea again, so this thing he has been researching for 20 years is no longer useful. Orgrim said with a smile, it's okay, I should be able to use it. He can't be polite to Shiji. It doesn't matter if you don't need it, I will definitely use it. Anyway, it's a master-disciple relationship. I'll support you in your old age, and you'll give me some inheritance. This is reasonable, isn't it? What's more, with Shiji's temper, even if he couldn't use it, after 20 years of research and waiting for so many years, he couldn't let the 1 IQ evolution technology fall into his hands. It must be taken out to show off and used. How to use? Of course Orgrim uses it. It's not your thing, so what if you use it, Shiji said very unhappily. Orgrim didn't care about him. He knew that Shiji was no longer a pirate overlord in the 20th century. He was just an elder. He felt a little awkward and couldn't turn around. It's just an elder who likes to chatter. Let him just say a few words. Anyway, no one will die, and no piece of meat will be lost. I ate 2 mouthfuls of meat, then poured a glass of wine and chatted with Caesar. After having a drink with Indigo, Orgrim didn't mention those words just now. Shiji's unhappiness seemed to have calmed down. The plan he had been raising for 20 years finally ended up being beaten by Orgrim. By gong. Even though he admires Orgrim very much, he treats Orgrim as his son and nephew. But in his heart, he still feels a little uncomfortable. But what can be done now that the matter has come to this? Do you really want to rely on these things to compete with Orgrim for maritime supremacy? Forget it. In the new era, there is no ship that can carry him. This is in terms of the captain's status. If you look at it as a passenger, he can still sit on the Black Narwhal, and it's a special VIP seat. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Brother Indigo, how many Baileys did I make at the end of this plan? Shiji suddenly asked. Back and forth, Shiji had invested all his wealth and the Baileys that Orgrim paid tribute to every year. He couldn't remember the specific amount, but it must have been an astronomical figure. Fortunately, he didn't plan to care about Bailey before, and only asked about the last investment. Indigo remembered it clearly, and said directly, Admiral, the last investment was 176.3 billion Bay. Profit. Shiji nodded after hearing this, then glanced at Orgrim and said, I don't want anything more from you. You ask someone to send me 200 billion to support me in my retirement. Technology and the monsters on the island are all yours. 200 billion belly for retirement? You want to eat gold and drink silver, ahem, soup. Orgrim said in shock. He seemed to have said something cruel just now, and he almost said it. After listening to Orgrim's words, Shiji slapped the table with an unhappy expression and said, "Will you give it or not?" "No," Orgrim said forcefully. Shiji was really stunned for a moment, but before he could react, Orgrim said, "How can 200 billion be enough, 500 billion? I won't take advantage of you either." Hearing this, Shiji came back to his senses from his daze. A touch of relief slowly appeared on his face. He nodded and said no more. "But I'm not bragging to you, Admiral, Bailey is nothing to us. Next time you ask me for money, be more generous. You are my elder, so you should say, 'Who can you give me?' 10 billion Baileys, I want to go out and soak my feet." Is this appropriate? While Orgrim was eating, he was still bragging to Shiki. Shiki glanced at Orgrim but said nothing. But after a while, he swallowed a mouthful of food and suddenly asked, "Which island is Andre on now?" Orgrim said directly without thinking, "I don't know, I didn't pay attention. I usually don't pay attention to him, how can I have so much time? Last time I heard that he was in Carnival City, I don't know what happened next." Shiji said unhappily after hearing this, "Are you still his father?" Orgrim. In this way, the meal ended amid lively chatting and swearing. At the same time, in Avalon in the Sea of Eternal Night. In Beckman's room, Beckman was holding a coffee cup in his hand and was drinking coffee. Not far away, Reiju was now a tall and graceful girl. She took over the secretarial work beside Beckman and was working quietly. "Grind coffee powder for him." In front of Beckman sat Nightingale. Dr. Nightingale rarely appeared in Avalon before. He spent most of his time in Melview doing trouble. Now that things at Melview have come to an end, he is back. Even though he rarely appears in Avalon, his qualifications are definitely very senior. Orgrim's first ship doctor, isn't he awesome enough? He was also very familiar with Beckman and others, so he didn't feel any restraint in front of the second boss. He drank oolong tea and chatted with Beckman. "So, I just came back not long ago, and I didn't even get much rest. Well, are you going to arrange a business trip for me?" Nightingale asked with a smile. "Alas, we really don't have enough manpower." Beckman nodded helplessly and said. Nightingale did not speak, but nodded along with him. When Beckman said this, there must be something important. Because the Warhammer pirates are not short of people, and Beckman said that there are not enough manpower, which means that this matter requires a big cotter to come forward. As for the big cotters, there are actually people on the island, but Eniro and others who can do things are not there. Sphinxiv, forget it. So Nightingale didn't refuse anything and asked directly, "What do you want me to do?" "Go to Alabasta," Beckman said softly, and after a slight pause, he continued, "Meet Crocodile." Nightingale's face twitched slightly, and then asked, "I wasn't here before, so I don't know much about these things." "Understood. Let me ask first, is our relationship with Crocodile good?" Beckman shook his head without hesitation and said, "It's quite bad. It's not an exaggeration. When the Golden City opened, it was pretty good, but later Crocodile ascended to the top of the Yonko and naturally became one of the competitors of the Warhammer pirates. After this back and forth, the relationship will definitely decline somewhat. What's more important is that Enel robbed Vivi. It's strange that Crocodile has good intentions towards the Warhammer pirates. It's just that he knows very well that he can't play for the time being, so he suppresses his anger." "Then you still ask me to go? Do you feel that my historical mission has been completed and I can die gloriously?" Nightingale complained. He felt that his strength, it's not bad, it can't be said to be weak. After all, where is the ability of the surgery fruit? The environment around him is also a boss environment. No matter what, his strength will not be that of a weak chicken in the true sense. Ken, compared with Crocodile, that is far behind. Nightingale didn't think she could compete with Crocodile in terms of strength. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to go to war with Crocodile, but to take a look at his intentions and thoughts. A war may break out at any time, and Orgrim hopes he can contribute. It is a visit and discussion. Beckman said with a smile. Nightingale still looked a little distrustful. After all, he had been tricked by the two bastard brothers Orgrim and Beckman. Seeing this, Beckman continued, I also found a master to protect you. Who? Nightingale hesitated and asked. Beckman smiled and said to the door, come in. As soon as he finished speaking, the door opened wide, and Aaron walked in with steps. Are you kidding me? It's a desert country. Nightingale said in confusion. Beckman was also confused and asked Aaron, how did you come? I just passed by the door and heard Irye asking me to come in, so I went in, Aaron said a little strangely. Beckman. Didn't you see Dipeng at the door? Beckman asked again. No, Aaron scratched his head and said. Ahem, that's none of your business, go ahead and do your work. Beckman shamelessly helped Aaron out, then took a deep breath and said, I won't betray you anymore. Dipeng will go with you when the time comes. Okay, leave it to me, Nightingale, the messenger of peace. Nightingale finally nodded in agreement. To read the underlined version of the novel. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 708. It has been a while since Alabasta was brought to the New World by Crocodile. This most ancient country of mankind has finally established a firm foothold in the New World after encountering many hardships. Crocodile became one of the Yonko among the pirates. Although he is the Yonko with the lowest influence and deterrence, he is still the fourth-ranked pirate in the New World. With his protection, Alabasta was doing okay. Even after moving to the New World, Alabasta's climate is still mainly dry. This may be a deliberate move by Crocodile. After all, he hates rain, which will affect his performance. But no matter what, it was better than in the first half of the Grand Line. The climate problem in Alabasta caused by Crocodile's abuse of dancing powder was also solved during this relocation. Previously, Crocodile did not like living in Albina, but after officially ascending to the top of the four emperors, he still moved to the capital of the Thousand-Year Kingdom. After Nightingale stepped into Albina, she was filled with emotions when looking at this magnificent ancient capital. He was born in the Drum Kingdom, not far from Alabasta. As the top doctor, Nightingale once won the reputation of the national doctor of the Drum Kingdom, and often visited various countries to treat princes and nobles. At that time, he frequently visited Alabasta as a guest. But the last time he landed on Alabasta and entered Albina was after he became a pirate. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 years have passed since 700. Nightingale's medical skills have become more and more powerful, but Alabasta has long since changed. After several wars, the stubborn will of this ancient country has not been interrupted. Albina seems to have experienced a rebirth. After the labor pain, this place even became more prosperous than it had been in the first half of the Grand Line. Looking at what? Are you familiar with this place? Katerina Depin asked with a cigarette in her mouth and a puff of smoke as she spoke. Nightingale came back to her senses, smiled and shook her head and said, it's not familiar yet. More than 20 years ago, everything has become different. The rulers here are no longer the Nefertali clan, and I have long been a pirate. Dipeng nodded, then thought for a while and asked, do you think there will be a conflict here? Are you not confident in yourself? Nightingale asked with a smile. Isn't that natural? I'm not Lord Hammer. No matter what Crocodile says, he still has the name of the four emperors. It is said that there are ancient weapons hidden here. The navy suffered great losses at his hands. It is also a desert country. I am afraid that there is no one in the world. Not many people can have the confidence to defeat Crocodile here, right? Dipeng didn't shy away at all and admitted it directly. Nightingale's eyelids twitched, nodded, and said, "You make sense." But as soon as he finished speaking, Dai Peng patted him on the shoulder and continued, "But don't worry, since I'm here, I will definitely protect you. Before I fall, I won't let croak. What did Dar do to you? Isn't the fruit of your operation very powerful in running away? Can you teleport or something? I won't leave you and run away." Nightingale followed. "Forget it, only one can leave," Dai Peng said with a smile, but his tone was very serious. "She is a very silent person in the Warhammer Pirates. Although she has done several big things, she usually keeps a low profile. She belongs to the most mysterious Warhammer, a big leader of the pirate group. On the surface, it seems that she does not have a very close relationship with the other leaders of the Warhammer Pirates. Instead, she has been in love and killing each other with the Sphinx for many years. But in fact, neither does Dai Peng. Has she been treated unfairly? The reason why she is like this is because she likes it, not because she is excluded. Everyone has a lifestyle that everyone likes, and they cannot be forced to socialize or be with their peers. Are we laughing and joking? That guy Mihawk is even more outrageous than Dai Peng. The others are almost not in Avalon. I haven't seen anyone say anything about him. In short, although Dai Peng rarely interacts with other cotters, but it does not mean that she has no feelings for the Warhammer Pirates and the rest of her companions. If she had not, she would not have turned into Orgrim and risked her life to torture the Navy. But speaking of it, although Dai Peng she doesn't have much interaction with the cotters, but she is not a homebody either. In addition to being a pirate, she also established a Dai Peng brand fashion company in Avalon. With Papa from Fishman Island cooperated with Guyu to create a very popular fashion brand and is a famous fashion designer. Yes, that's right. Although Dai Peng is ugly and has very bad interests, but you have to admit that her taste is indeed great, so even if she has horror interests, there are still a large number of fans in Avalon who are fans of her and call her Lord Dai Peng. Fortunately, although Dai Peng's interests are bad, she is also very sensible and never does such messy things in Avalon, nor does she create any horrible urban legends. Before Nightingale and Dupin came to Alabasta, the Warhammer Pirates were also angry with Crocodile. Therefore, after wandering around Albana for a while, people from Crocodile came to greet the two of them, and then the two of them were taken into the palace of Albana. Soon, Nightingale and Dupin met Crocodile in a palace. At the same time, there were a few familiar figures, including Perospero and other members of the former Big Mom Pirates. It can be seen that they are now valued by Crocodile. It is precisely because of such a group of backbones that Crocodile was able to quickly establish a foothold in the New World. Unlike Katakuri's remnants of the Big Mom Pirates who fled on the sea, the group of people Katakuri led all had a deep hatred for Orgrim and the Warhammer Pirates. The group led by Perospero was a little more adrift and didn't have that much hatred. Therefore, when they met Nightingale and the others at this time, they did not show any hostility. Crocodile is already the king of Alabasta at this time, but he is not recognized by the world government, but it doesn't matter, he is in the New World, and the opinions of the world government are meaningless. In practical terms, Alabasta was indeed under his rule. Nightingale was observing Crocodile, the king of the desert, not wearing gorgeous aristocratic clothes, nor wearing those magnificent crowns, nor holding a scepter symbolizing royal power. He was still the same as before, with his hair slicked back, biting a cigar, his eyes somewhat sinister, wearing a black suit and a brown-black coat. This means that before being the king of a country, he pays more attention to his identity as the pirate emperor. Nightingale actually admired Crocodile quite a bit and felt that Crocodile was a low-end version of Orgrim. Judging from many current appearances, it can be seen that Crocodile has a deep imprint of Orgrim on him, and everything he does, to a large extent, is imitating Orgrim. For example, in the governance of Alabasta, many of Alabasta's current policies are directly copied from Avalon. and Crocodile has no intention of walking lamely. Recently, he has been recruiting civilian members on a large scale, hoping to systematically optimize Alabasta's ruling class. Judging from his pirate strategy, Crocodile is undoubtedly imitating Orgrim. With the desert country of Alabasta as the core, it radiates to the surrounding islands to enhance its influence and so on. If it weren't for the fact that his strength was slightly embarrassing and could only be fully utilized in Alabasta, then Crocodile might have achieved higher achievements. Nightingale was observing Crocodile, and Crocodile was observing Nightingale. However, he did not observe Nightingale in such detail. In Crocodile's view, among the people in the entire Warhammer Pirates that he needs to take seriously, there is no Nightingale, nor is there this Katarina. Die Pen, 0, but the two of them came as leaders of the Warhammer Pirates. Although Crocodile had many unhappy thoughts about Orgrim, he had no intention of falling out with Orgrim in a short period of time. So after a little observation, Crocodile took the lead and said, "Welcome to Alabasta, both of you." There was a smile on Nightingale's lips, and she said, "On behalf of the Warhammer Pirates, please allow me to express my respect to Lord Crocodile." After saying that, Nightingale greeted you very politely. Crocodile saluted. Crocodile raised his brows and felt a little happier. At least in his territory, the Warhammer Pirates still knew the rules, which was a good thing. He hates when others act condescending to him here, not even the Warhammer Pirates. "Please also say hello to Master Chewie for me," Crocodile said with a smile, and the darkness in his eyes also dissipated a little. First they complimented each other in a formulaic way, and then Crocodile asked softly, "Dr. Nightingale, do you know what the Warhammer Pirates' orders are this time?" Nightingale's face remained unchanged, and her tone was still very calm, and she said, "I can't talk about orders. Lord Crocodile and our Warhammer Pirates are not and have never been superiors and subordinates. We should communicate on an equal footing." Crocodile nodded and felt a little relieved. At least the Warhammer Pirates didn't come in an aggressive manner, so it would be easier to discuss. Then Nightingale continued, "In today's world, on the surface, the wind is calm. In fact, the two camps of pirates and navy are secretly wrestling with each other. Perhaps you, Mr. Crocodile, have also felt it? What do you feel?" Crocodile asked softly. "The new world is already full of the smell of gunpowder. This is the smell of war. In other words, a war between the navy and pirates may break out at any time. And this war is not a war between one family, but involves all the pirates. The war of thieves' interests, isn't it?" Nightingale said with a smile. Crocodile did not deny this. In fact, before entering the New World, he had thought about competing with Orgrim for the dominant position in the war. But soon, he gave up this idea. Because he couldn't do it, the gap between him and Orgrim was really too big. After giving up on this, Crocodile actually gave up on this war. He did not want to get involved in this 2.2 duel between the Warhammer Pirates and Orgrim-led pirates and the Navy. Again, unlike the Navy, the pirates are a systematic army. The sea thieves are chaotic. Perhaps Crocodile's idea will harm the interests of all pirates, but he doesn't care at all. He believes that if the Navy wins, it may indeed bring huge benefits to the entire pirate camp. It will affect various things in the New World, but so what? As long as it doesn't directly harm Crocodile's interests, as for the rest, Crocodile can't eat it anyway. The most severely damaged interests, it should be Orgrim. Selfishness, this is a pirate. Therefore, Crocodile does not want to participate in these messy things at all now. So when Nightingale wants to talk about these current situations at this time, Crocodile suddenly waved his hand, and then said, "In such a situation, of course I can't understand, but unfortunately, Alabasta, have internal and external troubles, and I am really unable to support Mr. Hammer's idea." This was not what Lord Crocodile told Lord Hammer when he was in the Golden City. Nightingale's tone was also a little colder. Crocodile's words were not false at all. He shook his head without interest and said, this time and the other time, it was my fault for not thinking carefully at the beginning. Well, I, Alabasta, am willing to support the Warhammer Pirates with 200 billion belly for free. As a colleague, I can express my feelings. Okay. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 709. Melview, Orgrim has been living here for some time. Anyway, he had nothing to do recently, so he finally came back. Once he stayed in this beautiful paradise on Earth, he didn't want to leave. His courtyard is still here. There is no change at all, but people often come to clean it up, and it does not become dilapidated. At this time, Orgrim was basking in the sun in the courtyard, and not far in front of him, Monet was carefully brewing tea. This can be considered a vacation with my little secretary. Orgrim was in a happy mood. Monet was even more delighted. Although Orgrim has never done anything to Monet so far. But isn't this an opportunity? There are not many opportunities to be alone with Mr. Chewy. Master Chewy, have some tea. Monet held the teacup, walked to Orgrim's side, and said with a smile. Orgrim then opened his eyes, glanced at Monet, who was in a very happy mood, nodded with a smile, and then stretched out his hand. Took the teacup. Monet is a master of craftsmanship. Orgrim took a sip and praised with satisfaction. Practice makes perfect, not to mention the tea here at Admiral is also great. Monet responded with a smile. He nodded casually. It seemed that Orgrim had no intention of teasing the little secretary, but rather wanted to bask in the sun quietly. Monet was not discouraged. Seeing Orgrim, Monet stopped talking after taking a sip of tea, and was about to find something to talk about and take the initiative to chat. But just when Monet was thinking about how to strike up a conversation with Orgrim, she put it aside. In the handbag, the phone rang. Orgrim saw this and said, "Let's see what it is." Monet felt a little unhappy, secretly cursing the phone bug for disturbing her good things, but on the surface, she still took out the phone bug with a smile. After taking a look, Monet spoke softly. "Master Hammer, it's Nightingale." "Doctor? Nightingale?" Orgrim was stunned for a moment, and then asked, "Didn't that guy go to Alabasta to meet Crocodile? It seems like something really happened. Pick it up." As soon as Orgrim finished speaking, Monet quickly picked up the phone. Before she could speak, Nightingale's voice came from the phone. "Mr. Hammer?" Nightingale asked. Orgrim responded, "What's wrong? How are things?" It was not going well. Crocodile had too many thoughts on his mind. Nightingale quickly reported everything she saw and heard in Alabasta to Orgrim on the phone. Orgrim was originally in a happy mood, but the more he listened to Nightingale's report, the darker his expression became, and there was a hint of anger in his eyes. The little secretary Monet standing aside seemed to have noticed the change in Orgrim's aura. She could feel that Mr. Chewy was angry, and the looming momentum that seemed to be able to swallow people up made Monet very frightened. Snort. Orgrim snorted coldly at first, and then said in a cold tone, "This guy Crocodile is really shameless. 200 billion belly, who does he think I am? Begging for food?" Orgrim's tone made Nightingale and Monet dare not speak. He picked up the teacup and took another sip. Orgrim gradually let the anger in his chest dissipate and said, "That bastard is." He was sure that the situation was about to break out now. He was sure that I had a lot of worries and might not break up with him directly. "That, Mr. Hammer, what should we do? Should you accept these 200 billion belly?" Nightingale hesitated for a moment and asked. Orgrim seemed to be angry and laughed, and said, "Take it, why not take it? 200 billion for nothing is pretty good, isn't it? But we are not rude people. We took 200 billion from him today and we should give it back to him tomorrow. As soon as Orgrim finished speaking, Nightingale was a little surprised and quickly said, Master Hammer, I'm afraid this is not the right time to retaliate, right? It's not about revenge, it's just reciprocity. I happened to get a new technology from Boss Shiji. I asked Crocodile to evaluate it and experience it. Is it reasonable? Orgrim smiled evilly and said. Nightingale was stunned for a moment. He knew that Orgrim was in Melview. As for the new technology, as a scientific research boss who previously worked in Melview, of course he knew it very well. Isn't it the man-made ancient soldier? What do you mean? Nightingale whispered softly. Yan. Perhaps feeling that Orgrim was very angry at this time, Nightingale couldn't help but use honorifics when she spoke. I think he has nothing to do in Alabasta, so why not just fight monsters? Don't worry about this, I will arrange it. You don't have to deal with that sand crocodile. Let's go back to Avalon. Orgrim said in a deep voice. Yes, Mr. Hammer. Nightingale responded quickly. After hanging up the phone, Orgrim took another sip of tea. Looking at Monet, who was cautiously beside him, he couldn't help but smile and said, Why are you so nervous? I'm not a good-natured guy, and I don't like to express my anger at others. I don't know what happened, but Monet, who was still a little guilty at first, actually felt relieved after hearing Orgrim's words. She smiled and said, Master Hammer, let's go now. What are you doing? Go call Caesar and Indigo and tell him that I have prepared some entertainment activities for Boss Shiji to see if he is interested in going out for a walk. This research is said to be successful, but there is no practice yet. As the saying goes, true knowledge comes from practice. Let them go to Alabasta for a show. I want to see how long Crocodile can hold me back, Orgrim said coldly. Yes, Mr. Hammer, Monet quickly agreed. But just when she was about to get up and do something, Orgrim said again, then we'll pack up our things and we'll go back to Avalon. I see, Monet said again. At the same time, in Marineford, the naval headquarters. In the residence of Admiral Sakaski. Fergo was sitting quietly at the tea table, and Sakaski was holding a cup in his hand. He used gardening scissors to trim the plants in the flower pot in front of him. Without any hesitation, Sakaski cut off a slightly crooked seedling branch. Virgo still did not speak and drank silently. Drinking tea. He has been sitting here for a long time. He had been clocking in normally at the headquarters when he suddenly received an invitation from Sakaski, inviting him to sit at his home. So Virgo had nothing to do. Here it comes. After arriving, Sakaski made him a pot of tea, and then started pruning his garden without saying anything. After cutting off a few more branches, they looked straight and square. Sakaski nodded, slightly satisfied. Then, he picked up the potted plant, walked to the window, and placed the potted plant there. He had repeated this behavior many times, and just when Virgo thought when Sakaski continued to prune the next pot, Sakaski did not pick up the new potted plant. Instead, he walked back to the tea table and sat down cross-legged. Seeing this, Virgo quickly put it down. With the teacup in his hand, he sat up straighter. Just when he was about to say a few words, he saw Sakaski wave his hand and said, "It doesn't have to be so formal." Virgo nodded, and his originally straightened back relaxed a little. Sakaski took out the cigar box from under the table, handed Virgo a cigar and said, "Try it." Virgo was not polite. He smiled and reached out to take the cigar offered by Sakaski. He rarely smoked, and the same goes for cigars, but the general gave it to him personally, so he had to give it a try. At this time Sakaski was dressed very casually. He was not wearing a navy uniform or his burgundy suit. Since the climate in Marineford has been relatively hot recently, he was wearing a loose robe there was no other clothing. After sitting here, the clothes became loose, revealing the muscles underneath, as well as the tattoo covering his chest. It was cherry blossoms. If you look carefully, you can see that Sakaski there was a scar on his chest, not like a knife wound, but like a mark left after the wound had eroded and healed. Virgo's eyes involuntarily paused there. Sakaski seemed to have noticed it, and moved his cigar. He took a bite without lighting the fire. He took a deep breath and the end of the cigar started to burn. Natural ability users are so coquettish. After exhaling a puff of smoke, Sakaski stretched out his hand and pinched where the cigar in GE's mouth was lit easily. Curious, Sakaski asked. Well, a little bit. Virgo nodded. He didn't hide anything from Sakaski. Sakaski didn't care and said very naturally it was left behind during a battle with Orgrim. There was a look of understanding in Virgo's eyes. This is not a rare secret. In fact, the current 3 generals of the Navy have all suffered losses and defeats at the hands of Orgrim. De Haishang knows this. There are more people. But who dares to underestimate the Admiral? No one, after all, it is Orgrim. It is reasonable to lose to him. Have you ever played against Orgrim? Or performed a mission about him? Sakaski suddenly asked. Virgo shook his head again and said, no, in fact, a few years ago, I was planning to join G-5. I could go to the New World. At that time, I thought it would be great if we could catch Orgrim, but something happened later. When he said this, Virgo's expression just made him feel a little unhappy. Did you still have competition with Jun? Sakaski smiled and said, but his smile was really embarrassing and hard. It's not really a competition. At that time, I was just a major general, and the chief inspector was a senior lieutenant general. Virgo shook his head and said. Sakaski nodded, but did not continue to ask these questions. Instead, he said that guy Orgrim, I don't see him many times, but every time, I will talk to him if you do it. Unfortunately, you will lose to him every time. Saka, Kings, Sky talks about these things without any cover-up. He talks about winning or losing very simply. He seems to not care about his own face at all. Virgo is not surprised. His contact with Sakaski not much, but you can also understand that Sakaski is not a person who likes to be pretentious. What he cares about is not his personal face, but the face of the Navy. In short, that guy is a difficult person to deal with, especially now that he has become stronger. The next war will be very difficult. Sakaski spoke again. Virgo still nodded, but did not speak. But this war is not just against the Warhammer pirates. In fact, it is against the entire New World pirates. Judging from the map, if we want to take action, there is a link that cannot be avoided. Sakaski said a few words and brought the topic to the point. Whitebeard, pirates, Virgo said softly. That's right, the Whitebeard pirates. After the last war in the New World, the Whitebeard pirates lost to the Warhammer pirates, and were intentionally or unintentionally pushed to the edge of the New World portal sea. They became the same as us. The first line of confrontation, Sakaski said again very calmly. Virgo listened carefully without speaking. Whether it is from a tactical or strategic perspective, the Whitebeard pirates will be the first target that the Marshal will deal with after he starts the war. So, in that case, I don't have to be polite to them. When Sakaski said this, there was a gleam of fire in his eyes. I want to kill Whitebeard, Sakaski said in a very firm tone. A sledgehammer breaks into pirates. Author, Zippo. Chapter 710. As soon as Sakaski said these words, a look of surprise appeared in Virgo's eyes. However, the shock quickly dissipated. This scene all fell in Sakaski's eyes. But he didn't find it strange, because this idea was originally mentioned by Virgo. The reason why he was surprised was probably because he was surprised that he would actually adopt it, right? Yes, Virgo was really surprised at this time. Surprised that Sakazuki had really come this far? Although he had a lot of credit here, in fact, he was all following the arrangements of others. Fergo knew in his heart that this plan was actually controlled by Orgrim, the Hammer Lord far away in Avalon. And the Navy Admiral in front of him has actually come this far. Horrible. Sakazuki was actually very anxious. That guy from Jun is really awesome, a powerful rival. She circled around the New World, and then the Dovish Navy seemed to have received Kuzan's will. They stopped fighting and supporting Kuzan. On the contrary, they moved closer to Jun. This is not a faction problem, it is a problem between Kuzan and Jun. It only took Sakazuki half a day to figure everything out. That bastard Kuzan quit. He will no longer compete with himself for the position of marshal. On the contrary, he also recommended Jun to be the marshal. Sakazuki never thought that Kuzan could succeed, because he knew very well that Kuzan had a weakness that he could not get rid of. It had been like this for decades, and it could not be changed overnight. That's his swing. His concept of justice is vague. He believes that justice will undergo specific changes following specific objects. For individuals, this doesn't seem to be a big deal. Everyone has their own perseverance and beliefs. But for the entire Navy, a person who upholds this kind of justice will never be able to become a marshal. So Sakazuki isn't worried about Kuzan at all. But now, Kuzan has withdrawn, and Jun has made a strong appearance. Compared to Kuzan, Jun simply has no weaknesses. Sakazuki felt tremendous pressure. Not long ago, Lieutenant General Ghost Spider came to him privately and told him about Fergo's proposal and ideas. Using the arrogant and stinky Teach as an entry point, he can take down the Whitebeard pirates forcefully and achieve enough feats. Perhaps he can overpower Jun and become the marshal. At first, Sakazuki did not agree. He felt that the risk was too great. The current situation is like this, and rashly angering the Whitebeard pirates will definitely turn this matter into the trigger of the New World War. Sakazuki saw clearly and was not deceived. He knew very well that as long as he took action, war would inevitably break out. So he didn't get carried away and agreed directly. Instead, I thought about it for a few days. Until yesterday, when Grand Inspector Jun returned from the New World, the headquarters was preparing to grant Jun the rank of Navy Admiral, which was a false position and false power. However, even though it was a false position and false power, this time, it had been shown that Jun was qualified and could legitimately compete with him, Sakazuki, for the position of Navy Marshal. At the same time, Sakazuki had already received the news that Jun was about to take the rank of General, but he could not stop it. And when all this became a reality, Sakazuki understood one thing. The warring states marshal supported Jun. He, Sakazuki, still couldn't get the support of the current Navy Marshal after Kuzan withdrew. Sakazuki did not resent anything, because he knew very well that he and the warring states Marshal did not have the same ideals to inherit the past and the future, and they could not talk together at all. Over the years, Marshal Sengoku has been able to level a bowl of water and has not always been biased towards the dovish navy. This is already worthy of him, Sakazuki. It can even be said that Sakazuki is able to compete for the position of marshal in this way, which is considered to be a broad-minded marshal. Sakazuki didn't bother him and gave him this opportunity. But not being resentful and understanding this does not mean that Sakazuki has no anger in his heart. It doesn't mean that Sakazuki can accept this fact calmly. But this is still not the reason why Sakazuki is determined to kill Whitebeard. What really made him settle down was the second important matter. After the Grand Inspector of Jun came back from inspecting the New World, the headquarters held a confidential meeting yesterday, and all the participating members were big bosses from the Navy. As the only general left behind in the headquarters, Sakazuki naturally went to the meeting. At this meeting, Sakazuki officially learned of Marshal Warring States' plan to seize the war initiative. That is, Marshal Sengoku is planning to parachute Marineford to the New World using Fujitora's ability to smile. and it will be implemented within 1 month at the earliest and 3 months at the latest. The people of Sakaski are stupid. The plan was a good one. After Sakaski thought about it for a while, he had to admit that this plan was indeed very impactful and could establish the Navy's initiative in the New World in time. But the key point is that as a naval admiral, Sakaski was the last one among several big bosses to know. What made him feel even more aggrieved was that he originally thought that the task of supervising the construction of the New World and new Navy headquarters would fall into his hands, Sakaski. This was a feat he felt he would surely achieve. Perhaps with his contribution in supervising the establishment of the New World Naval Headquarters, he, Sakaski, could surpass Jun. For this reason, Sakaski has always believed that the war will not happen until at least a year later. As a result, the Marshal is so anxious. Kuzan and Porisalino both built fortresses in the New World, but I, Sakaski, didn't leave any mark on the New World. How is this possible? At the same time, during this meeting, Sakaski also determined one thing, that is, although he had already planned how to seize the initiative and airborne Marineford into the New World. But in fact, the warring States Marshal did not figure out how to start this war. In what way? This gave Sakaski some ideas. In the conference room, he suddenly thought of Ghost Spider and Virgo. The warring States Marshal did not figure out how to start a war. Then let me, Sakaski, start this war. Find a way to capture the captain of Whitebeard's 2nd Division, and then use this guy named Marshal ID Teach as a trigger to detonate the Whitebeard pirates. Then he went all out to kill the Whitebeard pirates and break the shackles of the New World Portal Sea. Then, the official battle with the Warhammer pirates. Sakaski had the right thing in mind. After this set of plans, the first priority is the word quick. After capturing Teach, he immediately gave the news to the Whitebeard pirates, and then directly launched an annihilation plan against the Whitebeard pirates. Do it as fast as you can. In this way, the well-prepared Navy can catch the pirates off guard. Even if the Whitebeard pirates want to ask for help from other pirates, such as the Warhammer pirates, the Warhammer pirates may not be able to prepare for a counterattack in a short period of time. Mobilize those war resources to deal with the war. Maybe by the time Orgrim finishes all this, the Navy will have eliminated the Whitebeard pirates. Although I have such a rough plan in mind. But Sakaski did not bring it up directly at the meeting. This is just a bit of his selfishness. When he raised it in the conference room, Sakaski was not sure whether the Marshal would leave this matter to him. However, judging from the current situation and support, there is a high probability that it will not happen. In case this plan is handed over to Jun by the Marshal for execution. Then isn't he, Sakaski, a fool? Can't get along with anything? Can you only fight your way to the top in war? You can't bully honest people like this, right? So Sakaski decided to strike first and then tell the story later. I'll catch that Marshal D Teach first, and then I'll tell you all about the plans. As for how to explain it to the Marshal then? It's also very simple, and even more reasonable. Anyway, this plan, if I can't catch Tikai, is all a fantasy. When the time comes, I will say that I am afraid that everyone will be happy in vain, so I caught Tikai first and then reported it. It is reasonable and reasonable. But now, Sakaski can't go to the New World. The Marshal is afraid that Sakaski will cause trouble in the New World, so he keeps him locked up in Marineford, the Navy headquarters. As a result, Sakaski's influence in the New World will not be enough, and it will be inconvenient to do what he wants to do. But Sakaski quickly thought of some of the back ups he had done before, such as arranging for Fergo to enter the New World and serve as the base commander of the G-3 base. It seems that G-3 will be put into use in less than 2 days, and Fergo will be able to take up his post in the New World. Sakaski decided to leave this matter to Fergo. 0, this is the real reason why he is here today and invited Fergo to his home to talk. General, you are really decisive, Fergo complimented softly. Sakaski shook his head helplessly and said, the situation is stronger than the people. The current situation does not allow me, Sakaski, to continue to hesitate and harm the navy. I won't do things that are of profit, and I don't bother to use these means to seize the position of marshal. But if we can benefit from both sides, then I, Sakaski, will definitely do it. Virgo nodded, not doubting Sakaski's words. Putting aside the follow-up plans you mentioned, let me ask you, can you catch that martial ID teach? Sakaski asked in a deep voice. Virgo did not promise anything. Instead, he hesitated and said, this requires your help, General. I am alone and I am not an opponent. I hope there can be someone helper. If Virgo agreed immediately, Sakaski might really suspect something. But when he said this, Sakaski felt a lot more relieved. The last trace of doubt in my heart about Virgo also dissipated. Ghost Spider, Doberman, Dalmatian, I can use the resources of the Hawks to help you, Sakaski said in a deep voice. It was impossible for him to go to the New World to catch this teach, because it would be too conspicuous. Therefore, he could only send out his own capable generals. After hearing this, Virgo stopped hesitating. Quickly said, promise to complete the task, all for justice. Sakaski nodded, exhaled a puff of smoke, picked up the teacup on the table, took a sip and said, then leave it to you, Virgo. Virgo was also a little excited. A few more helpers from the Eagle Navy would not affect his plan at all. Because he had to act according to Orgrim's plan, and in Lord Hammer's plan, nothing else is important. The most important thing is to let Sakaski catch Tiki alive. As long as Tiki doesn't die, that's all. Now, Sakaski is already moved, so the helper he sent, it will only bring gains and will not bring other problems. Sakaski does not want a dead teach. At this stage, the goals of both parties are the same. Virgo walked out of Sakaski's mansion, raised his head and glanced at the clear sky with thousands of miles of sunshine. He was a little emotional, and couldn't help but think in his heart, I'm afraid no one will know that this hegemonic war about justice and evil was started by an inconspicuous little person like me. Here to promote, right?